New job. That fresh start energy is so real, isn't it? New team, new challenges. But then you open your inbox or sit through onboarding, and it hits you.
The sheer volume of information.
Exactly. Like, how am I supposed to make sense of all this? But hey, that's why you're with us for this deep dive. If you're feeling even slightly overwhelmed by the info flood that comes with a new job, trust me, you're not alone.
Not at all. And the thing is, this isn't just you needing to toughen up or anything. There's actual science behind why that drinking from a fire hose feeling is so common, especially early on.
Oh, there's research on this. Okay, I'm all ears because I just thought I was bad at starting new jobs.
The research actually calls it infoxication, and it's a real phenomenon.
Infoxication. That sounds kind of serious.
It can be, especially in a new job when everything's unfamiliar. See, there are actually two main ways this info overload sneaks up on us.
Two ways.
Yeah.
Like what, besides just a general sense of too much?
Okay, so you've got the rapid onset kind. That's exactly what we're talking about, the fire hose during onboarding. New names, new systems, maybe even industry jargon you've never encountered before. It's a lot to process at once.
Oh, tell me about it. I once started a job where they basically spoke a different language. Acronyms for everything.
And that's just it. It's like your brain's trying to build a whole new filing cabinet while simultaneously stuffing it full of papers.
Makes sense why it feels so chaotic. But you said there was another kind of info overload.
Right. So there's the rapid onset, but then there's the slow burn. This one's sneakier. It's that feeling you get at the end of each day. Maybe not even right away, but you're just mentally wiped.
Oh, yeah. Like you haven't even moved from your chair, but you're exhausted.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the thing with the slow burn. It can be harder to pinpoint. You're not necessarily panicking, but you're constantly absorbing, trying to make sense of it all. And that takes a toll.
So it's not just about surviving the initial info dump. It's about the long game, too.
And this is where it gets really important for our listeners to understand. Ignoring infoxication, whether it's that initial wave or the slow burn, it has consequences. And not just on how well you do your job.
Wait, really? I figured it was just about pushing through. Eventually it gets better, right?
That's what a lot of us think. But the research is clear. We're talking increased stress, problems with sleep.
Oh, see, now you're hitting close to home. I always thought my sleep was just bad because, well, life.
It could be a factor, absolutely. But this info overload, it impacts your body too. Some studies even suggest it can weaken your immune system.
No way. So this isn't just about toughing it out. We need a game plan. Which is perfect, because that's what this whole deep dive is about, right? Giving people tools to handle this. Okay, so no more grin and bear it when it comes to info overload.
No.
Time to ditch the powering through and actually work with how our brains handle all this new stuff.
Absolutely. And a big part of that is recognizing that it's not always about the information itself. It's about us, our own internal state, and how that plays into things.
You mean like, if I'm already stressed, trying to absorb a million new things is going to be a recipe for disaster.
It's like trying to bake a cake while on a roller coaster, right? Not going to end well. Our emotions really do act like this filter for everything that's coming in. And when that filter's overloaded, well, it's tough for anything to get through clearly.
Makes total sense.
Yeah.
So how do we fix it? Do we just, like, tell ourselves not to feel overwhelmed? Because that's not really working for me so far.
I hear you, and luckily that's not what the research suggests. In fact, one of the experts we looked at, Dr. Susan David, she's big on this idea of emotional agility. And step one, allowing yourself to feel those feelings.
Wait, really? So I can just be like, yep, this is a lot, and I'm freaking out a little.
It sounds so basic, right?
Yeah.
But giving yourself permission to feel that way is huge, because then instead of this pressure to pretend everything's fine, you can actually start to address what's going on.
So we acknowledge the feeling,
Yeah.
but then what? How do we actually move past it, especially when there's still a mountain of info to deal with?
That's where emotional labeling comes in. It's a game changer. And before you think it's just about putting on a happy face, it's not that at all. It's about getting specific.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Give me an example. How would someone use this emotional labeling thing in the real world, like on the job?
So instead of just saying, ugh, I'm so stressed, which doesn't really give you anywhere to go, you dig a little deeper. Are you stressed because the task is confusing? Are you stressed because you feel like you have to be perfect right away?
Oh, wow. Yeah, there's a big difference between stressed and I'm confused about this process and it's making me anxious.
Huge difference, because now you've identified the actual problem, confusion, and that you can do something about. Maybe you ask a colleague for clarification or take some extra time to review the materials.
Whereas stress just kind of hangs over everything. No solutions there.
And the best part is, a lot of this research, it doesn't just point out the problem, it gives you tools. Like feeling impatient, totally normal when you're on a steep learning curve. But instead of letting it derail you, schedule those short breaks into your day.
It's so true. We try to power through, but honestly, our brains just aren't wired for that. A little break can make a world of difference.
Huge difference. And what about when confusion is the main culprit? The experts we looked at recommend actually writing down your sticking points, literally making a list so you can then strategically ask for help.
So much better than just feeling lost and overwhelmed. It's like you're taking control.
Exactly. And this is where a supportive boss or a great team can make all the difference in those early days. But even if you're on your own, figuring out how to name those emotions gives you a starting point.
It's amazing how much power there is in just understanding what we're feeling.
Right.
But it's like that first step to actually doing something about it. But what about the information itself? All that stuff we have to take in. How do we even begin to manage that part, our poor brains?
Well, now we shift gears a bit from managing ourselves to managing our brains. Because as incredible as they are,
They're not exactly known for being super organized, are they?
that's putting it mildly. But one thing that really helped me see this in a new light was when we looked at some research by a psychiatrist, Srini Pillai. He describes the brain as this amazing filtering system.
A filtering system. So it's not just like a giant hard drive storing every single thing we encounter.
Not even close. Some info gets priority access, goes straight to short-term memory because we need it right then. Other stuff, it gets blended with existing knowledge, stored for the long haul, and then, well, some of it just gets tossed out.
Tossed out. I guess that's probably a good thing, otherwise our brains would be overflowing.
Right. But the key takeaway here is that this filtering process, it's happening constantly. And what's even more interesting is that we can actually get better at it.
Okay, hold on. You're telling me we can train our brains to be more efficient at handling information. Sign me up. So we're talking about working with our brains, not against them. I like it. What are some of those strategies that can actually make a difference?
One that really stood out to me was this idea of strategic attention. It's so easy to fall into the trap of thinking we need to absorb every single detail right away, especially in a new job.
Oh, 100%. Like, if I don't write it down this second, I'll never remember it. But that's not always true, is it?
Not at all. This expert, Srini Pillai, he uses the example of sitting through a presentation. If you're frantically trying to write down every word on the slide.
Then my hand cramps just thinking about it.
Exactly. But here's the thing, if you'll have access to those slides later, why are you putting that pressure on your brain to memorize it all on the spot?
It's like we haven't learned that our brains don't have unlimited storage space.
And even more than that, they're not meant to work that way. Give yourself permission to absorb the big picture first. Get the gist, understand the key takeaways, and save the detailed review for when you can actually sit with the information.
So much less pressure on our poor brains. Okay, what else can we do? Because I'm already feeling a little calmer just knowing I don't have to be a human copy machine.
Right. So another strategy that I absolutely loved was this idea of creating what the research calls an external brain.
An external brain.
Okay.
Now you've got my attention. That sounds kind of futuristic.
It's actually quite simple, but so effective. One of the researchers talked about a colleague who starts every new job by basically creating their own little internal knowledge base.
Like a personalized Wikipedia for their job. I kind of want to see that.
Right. But the point is, it's a way of taking all those little bits of information, key people and their roles, important processes, even those little aha moments you have, and putting them somewhere safe.
Instead of those nuggets of wisdom getting lost in the black hole of our inboxes. I like it.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy. Find a system that works for you. A digital document, a notebook, whatever, helps you get it out of your head and into a place where you can easily access it later.
So much better than trying to remember it all. Speaking of remembering things, any tips on note-taking? Because I feel like that's another area where I could use some help.
Oh, absolutely. This one surprised me, but the research actually recommends ditching the laptop and going old school with handwritten notes.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
The typing is so much faster.
Yeah, it might seem that way, but it turns out that the physical act of writing engages different parts of our brain. Something about that connection between hand and paper creates a stronger memory trace.
So all those years of scribbling notes in school, maybe there was something to that.
And here's another tip, don't be afraid to get visual. Mind maps, doodles, different colored pens. It all helps.
So those messy notes that we might have thought were less efficient are actually better for learning and remembering. My inner middle schooler who doodled all over everything is rejoicing right now.
It's funny how often our instincts about productivity are completely backwards. And speaking of things we often get wrong, we have to talk about multitasking.
Oh, the multitasking myth. Everyone wants to be a master multitasker, but is that even possible?
The research is very clear on this one. Multitasking is a killer, not just of our productivity, but of our ability to focus and do our best work. Our brains are wired for focus, for giving our attention to one thing at a time.
But what about when it feels like everything's urgent and important? How do we escape that multitasking trap, especially in a new job when there's so much coming at us?
Well, one technique that came up a lot in our research is the Pomodoro technique. Have you heard of that?
I have. Isn't that the one where you work in these little bursts of time?
Exactly. You set a timer for 25 minutes, focus on a single task, and when the timer goes off, short break. It's amazing how much you can get done when you're not constantly switching between tasks.
Those little breaks make all the difference, don't they? It's like hitting the reset button for your brain.
It's not just about rest, although that's important too. The research actually shows that our brains solidify memories and make connections during those downtime moments. So those breaks aren't just a luxury, they're essential for processing everything.
It's like we're telling our brains, hey, we're in this together. Let's take a breather so we can tackle the next thing with full energy.
Which, speaking of energy, the research also talked about staying hydrated, right? Is there really a connection between how much water we drink and info overload?
Absolutely. Our brains need fuel, just like our bodies. Even mild dehydration can lead to brain fog, fatigue, and make it that much harder to process information. So keep that water bottle handy.
So to wrap things up for our listeners today, remember this. If you're feeling overwhelmed by all the new information coming at you in your new job, you are not alone. It's a real thing, and it has a name, Infoxication. But the good news is, there are simple, practical strategies you can start using today to manage that info overload.
Acknowledge those emotions, give yourself permission to not be okay all the time, and then get curious about those feelings. What's really going on there?
And remember, your brain is like a muscle over. Treat it kindly. Embrace those external brain tools, ditch the multitasking myth, and don't underestimate the power of those micro breaks and a good dose of H20.
And above all, be kind to yourself, be curious, and enjoy this new chapter.
Your brain will thank you for it. That's a wrap on today's deep dive. We hope you feel empowered, equipped, and ready to tackle those information challenges head on. And until next time, happy learning.